We're exploring the massive wave of socio-cultural reform movements that literally reshaped the Indian subcontinent in the 19th and early 20th centuries. If you've ever wondered how modern Indian society laid its cultural foundations right in the middle of British colonial rule, well, you're in the perfect place. We are going to unpack a whole century of intense intellectual, religious, and social battles. Picture this. At the dawn of the 19th century, Indian society was caught in this vicious web of superstitions, extreme caste rigidities, and severe gender inequality. There was this urgent, desperate need for an internal awakening. And then the British arrive, bringing a stark contrast, right? You have an administration shaped by the post-Enlightenment West, suddenly interacting with a society that had become politically and socially static. The priests had an absolute monopoly on scriptural knowledge, and practices like idolatry, untouchability, and the systemic subjugation of women were just deeply, deeply entrenched. To make sense of over 30 different movements, we're breaking this explainer down into 5 quick chapters: the spark of reform, Western and Southern awakenings, revival and social service, awakening across diverse faiths, and finally, the legacy of reform. Okay, Chapter 1, the spark of reform. We've got to start our journey in Bengal. This was the absolute epicenter of early rationalism. Enter Raja Rammohan Roy. The guy was a versatile genius, often called the father of the Indian Renaissance. Roy founded the Brahmo Samaj back in 1828 with one monumental goal: purifying Hinduism. He preached monotheism, relying heavily on the Vedas and Upanishads, and fiercely campaigned against inhuman practices. In fact, he relentlessly used those sacred texts to prove that religion did not sanction the burning alive of widows. And it actually worked. It led directly to the government regulation in 1829 declaring Satya crime. But of course, change never happens without a fight. While the Brahmo Samaj is pushing for reason, women's rights, and ditching meaningless rituals, the Orthodox crowd is feeling seriously threatened. I mean, you actually had figures like Raja Radhakan Deb stepping up to form the Dharma Sabha, literally just to counter the Brahmo propaganda and protect the old ways. It was a fierce ideological battleground. And this intellectual energy just snowballed. On one hand, you had the raw, radical energy of the young Bengal movement, led by Vivian Derozio, who pushed his students to think freely and question all authority. Though, to be fair, their radicalism was a bit too bookish for the average person. But then you have the deeply practical Ishwar Vidyasagar, total humanist. He opens up the Sanskrit college to non-Brahmins and successfully fights for the legalization of widow remarriage, giving us the pivotal Hindu Widows Remarriage Act of 1856, a real game changer. Moving on to Chapter 2, Western and Southern Awakenings. As this energy spread out of Bengal, the West and South sparked their own incredibly powerful movements against caste and orthodoxy. Just listen to this bold quote: "If religion does not sanction social reform, then change religion." That perfectly captures the fiery rationalism of Maharashtra's reformers. Gopal Deshmukh, writing as Lokahitawadi, demanded that humanistic values absolutely must supersede outdated religious dogma. They weren't afraid to attack Hindu orthodoxy head-on to build a modern, secular society. So what did this look like on the ground? Well, reformers realized that no society progresses if half its population is stuck in ignorance. They went all in on building schools, especially for girls, and fighting against the degrading practice of untouchability. The message was clear: let's work for betterment in the real world, right here and now, rather than just striving for salvation after we die. You had some major heavy hitters defining the West. Jyotirao Phule's Satyashodhak Samaj in 1873 was revolutionary purely because its leadership came directly from the backward classes. Phule wanted the complete abolition of the caste system. Meanwhile, the Prarthana Samaj under M.G. Ranade championed monotheism and women's education, and Krishna Gokhale's Servants of India Society focused on training selfless national missionaries to serve the country. Zooming down south, the struggle becomes highly focused and aggressively anti-caste. The justice movement is demanding political representation for non-Brahmins. Then, E.V. Ramaswamy Naikar kicks off the self-respect movement, aiming for a total rejection of Brahminical culture, even doing weddings without Brahmin priests. And we absolutely cannot forget the monumental temple entry movements, like the 1924 Vaikam Satyagraha in Kerala, demanding that temples and roads finally be opened to the untouchables. All right, Chapter 3, Revival and Social Service. By the late 19th century, this reformist spirit starts to fracture and evolve. It develops into both progressive social service and much more aggressive religious revivalism.
You see these organizations cascading across the decades, each one either building on the rationalist foundations of the last or directly rebelling against them. It created an incredibly dynamic marketplace of ideas. A really stark contrast emerges here. On one side, you have the highly intellectual, didactic approach of the Bengal elites. But on the other side, you have the profound, emotional, bhakti-driven appeal of figures like Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. Ramakrishna wasn't sitting around writing dense academic books. He spoke in simple parables drawn from everyday life. He experienced spiritual trances and taught that, fundamentally, all religions are essentially true.
This brings us to two massively influential groups. First, Dayananda Saraswati's Arya Samaj, founded in 1875. They aggressively pushed a revivalist, go back to the Vedas agenda, and were militant in protecting Hindu society, even starting the Shuddhi, purification movement to reconvert people. On the flip side, Swami Vivekananda's Ramakrishna mission, founded in 1897, focused on universal humanism. Vivekananda famously wild the 1893 Parliament of Religions in Chicago, blending Eastern spiritualism with Western materialism, and pushing the idea that serving living beings is the ultimate worship of God.
Next up, Chapter 4, Awakening Across Diverse Faiths. Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this modernization wave wasn't just a Hindu thing. It swept across the Muslim, Sikh, and Parsi communities too. Take the Muslim community, for example. You see a fascinating ideological clash. Sir Syed Ahmed Khan's Agarkar movement sought to harmonize Islam with modern liberal Western education. He pushed for social reforms regarding purdah and polygamy. But on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, the traditionalist Deoband school vehemently opposed this westernization, focusing entirely on pure Islamic teachings and keeping the anti-colonial spirit alive. Similarly, you have other communities fiercely protecting their identities while still embracing reform. The Sikh community forms the Singh Sabha movement, setting up modern Khalsa schools and countering proselytization. And among the Parsis, reformer Behramji Malabari makes massive strides. He founds the Seva-Sadin in 1908 to care for destitute women, and it was his tireless, on-the-ground effort that actually led to the passing of the Age of Consent Act. Finally, Chapter 5, The Legacy of Reform. So, what is the big takeaway from this incredibly dense century of activism? How did all these distinct, sometimes completely contradictory movements shape the subcontinent? Well, this ideological struggle proved to be a vital instrument in creating an Indian national consciousness. By weeding out corrupt practices and translating texts into vernacular languages, worship became personal again. And crucially, it ended the country's intellectual isolation, creating a society that could finally look its colonial rulers in the eye with renewed cultural pride. Objectively, though, we have to look at the balance sheet. In the pro column, these movements brilliantly promoted a secular, rational outlook and gave the rising middle classes their cultural roots back. They championed individual liberation. But in the con column, their social base was incredibly narrow. Because they were driven almost entirely by the educated, urban middle class, they tragically ignored the pressing, everyday needs of the vast masses of the peasantry and the urban poor. And there was a darker, totally unintended legacy as well. The tendency of these reformers to rely on ancient scriptural authority to justify modern changes, it accidentally fostered mysticism and pseudo-scientific thinking. Even worse, by defining their identities so heavily around specific religious texts, these movements inadvertently forced Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, and Parsis into separate compartments. They were literally laying the deeply tragic roots of modern communalism. But ultimately, zooming out, despite the flaws, the sectarian disputes, the narrow bases, these movements birthed a completely new society. They created a climate for modernization and prepared a highly mobilized, newly educated, and politically aware generation. A generation that was finally ready to transition from social reform to the massive political fight for independence that would define the 20th century. As we wrap up this explainer, let me leave you with this one thought. When you look at today's intense debates over caste discrimination, gender equality, and religious identity, aren't we still fighting the exact same battles sparked by these early reformers? That wave of change that began in the 1800s, it hasn't crested yet. We are still writing it today. Thanks for joining me, and keep questioning the history that shapes our present.